Um, Knowing the work and the sheer breadth and interest of Gauri's, it should have been a much longer session, but we have 30 minutes and we are going to try to make sense of what had happened last year. It's a part of a series of such incidents in the last 6 or 7 years, about 17 or 18, depends on how you count the methodology, writers or journalists have been murdered in India. And it's 17 or 18 too many. Not one of them should face what these writers have faced. Chandan has put together a fantastic anthology of her work in English, rapidly and quickly, and it is out now. My first question is, who was she? Why does she matter?
Gauri was many things. Primarily a journalist. She edited a weekly in Kannada, but she also a publisher, an activist.
I think you need to
Speak up.
She was many things. I mean, primarily a journalist, of course. She edited her own weekly, but also a publisher and an activist in recent years, throwing herself in support of many struggles in Bangalore and outside Bangalore. And she was a part of a peace forum. She was also part of a negotiating committee for the release of, bringing a few Naxal individuals into the mainstream who wanted to surrender.
And, sorry.
She was a public intellectual
Yeah.
and an activist, yes.
Yeah. And you knew her well, so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, she was a dear friend.
Because you do write about your dinners and when you were doing the research and all that.
Yes.
So if you show tell us some of the personal.
Yeah. She was a friend, she was a neighbor, and we spent much time, discussing things. She had just taken over as the editor of the weekly in 2000, and the first few years were important for me to get to know her better and vice versa. We did many things together. I was write for her weekly, and was often part of the events she would organize. Yeah, she was extraordinarily warm, affectionate, very caring, very serious about India's democracy, and deeply committed to secularism. These are all public descriptions, but
Yeah.
she truly was a very warm person who was very loving of things around her. And when people are feeling so saddened by the event, it has a lot to do with the fact that she was such a caring individual.
Yeah.
I have a question
Yeah.
about
I think you need to bring it a little closer.
yeah, because there seems to be uniformity
Yeah.
about the kind of crisis we are facing in terms of freedom of expression. Is fear being used as a weapon against the idea of freedom, especially when you want to tell the truth? So that's question number one. And how did Gauri actually negotiate this aspect? Where was the source of her courage? Because I'd like to read out something from the book, just 2 lines. It's perhaps not possible in today's world for a journalist to be pro-people if he is not an activist in his or her own way. So is that what journalism meant for her? Was that where she derived the courage to face fear when fear was being used as a weapon?
Thank you. She was fearless much before fear was began to be used as a weapon that we are also familiar with in the last few years. The book has a few of her essays that she wrote in her late 20s, early 30s for Sunday magazine, and any piece there will tell you that she was defiant and irreverent towards power, and she's very comfortable in calling out humbug, if you want to call it that, but definitely very caring about democratic values. I mean, you see it from the beginning, and where does she get this from? From her own convictions, I'm sure, but also the fact that her father, who started the weekly, was also staunchly committed to democratic values for 2 decades through his paper, and that has mattered deeply for her, I'm sure.
Is it how she felt about dissent? Is it something which she felt was part of democracy, dissent? Because I remember reading that in this great book which you have put together for her, where she talks about dissent as being part of democracy and not being separate from, or the way it is being portrayed. So Was that?
Yeah, no, Dissent was integral, and the paper was nothing if not a rich space for a variety of dissenting voices,
Right, yeah.
including her own. And most people who could not, find a space for a story in a mainstream paper would run to her for appeal, and she would always, accommodate them. To answer the other question from your previous intervention about the fear being used, if we saw the responses to what happened, many said, would this have happened if she had not blamed this organization, if she had not criticized this particular party? So it's clear.
Is there a serious role of social media in bringing about those kind of verdicts? Is there a pressure on investigative agencies where social media already makes up the mind of the people? Do you think there is that?
Yeah, well, I hope the investigating agencies are not taking the social media into account, but social media is recent, but she's been faced with threats of various kinds from the day she became the editor of the paper, which was in 2000, but she had become inured to them, inured in the sense of people write all kinds of letters, threatening letters, but none of that will translate into action. That seemed to be her belief, and we haven't had this phenomenon of critical journalists being killed.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the things that comes through the writing is, a kind of fearlessness, as if she didn't know fear.
Yes.
Yes. Now, the question I had was it because there was an inbuilt courage, or was there a streak of recklessness about it? Because dissent and taking it to an extent and pushing come what may. I mean, how do you characterize that?
Yeah, I think as a person, she was fearless. And she also felt she owed it to the paper's own traditions to continue to be fearless for that sake. So there's an homage to a tradition that had felt it had to be fearless towards all authority figures, not just politicians, religious heads of religious establishments, businessmen, corporate heads.
Yes.
So she would have betrayed the paper if she had not continued to be fearless. There was that imperative, but she was also fearless by nature. And a streak of recklessness, I'm glad you pointed it out. I think that was also there in her.
Yeah. Please.
There must have been a lot of pressure under which she wrote those pieces which you have put together in the anthology. How did she deal with labeling, which is so common these days, to call somebody against that a person is against a religion or a community? I remember reading in this that she said that she is against Hinduism or a particular community. How did she deal with that kind of pressure when she wrote? I see that her writings are absolutely neutral. There is a great amount of objectivity. How did she continue to be so forgiving?
Forgiving of?
Of the people who labeled her in this way.
Yeah, so there is a deep sense of, I think, hope that things will come around.
Right.
But the question of language is an important one. Again, to go back to the prose of this particular weekly, it had a personalized prose, by which I mean you would not have a distancing way of addressing public figures. You would call them by their first names, you would have shorthand expressions for them to make them, to bring them closer to you.
There are these three names, right, for Hegde, and just repeat, can you just remind us of what they are? Yeah. For Hegde, Gundurao and Bangarappa, if I remember well, yes.
Yeah. Gundurao would be Gum, Bangarappa would be Bum, and Hegde would be Gullenari, which means fox. And if a Swamiji, for example, had a long name, Balagangadharanatha Swamiji, it would be Balu. And all of this is being done with a sense of playfulness, but also utter political seriousness. It is not just a comical way of, it's not a spoof piece.
I want to go back to the point you made about humbug. And, she's of course written about people in authority without any fear and speaking truth to power and speaking sarcasm to power also at one level. And in that, she's almost like the American pamphleteers, like I.F. Stone is one example that came to me when I was looking at that, that you can't expect objectivity because she's wedded to the topic and she has extremely strong views. So what was it about? Was it an irritation with the humbug of people with authority? And what are the kinds of people she took on? Because she literally, nothing was sacred for her, right?
Yeah, I mean, who did she take on? She took on corrupt officials. She took on corrupt people in different areas of life. Politicians for sure, and religious figures, like I said, who are known to be corrupt.
Yeah.
Yes, but I mean, there was a deep sense of unaccepting of injustice. And that was very, very clear. And she keeps writing, why do I keep going amidst all the difficulties of, resources, etc. It's just a sense of wanting to keep democracy going, and Dissent is part of it. And please remember, this paper did not take refuge in things like it is alleged, it is supposed to be that, it's believed that, it's rumored that. No, it was Salil did this, Chandan did that, and which was an invitation for
lawsuits, right?
Very
she faced
many,
quite
very
a few
many,
of them.
Very many. I mean, she spent a lot of time traveling to courts in different parts of Karnataka.
Yeah.
And she was fortunate in having many friends, lawyer friends, who worked for her for free because they believed in what she was doing.
Yeah, but the other interesting part is when you're going to rely on pro bono support, it's clearly that your revenue base is small.
Yes.
And she took a conscious decision on advertising. Can you tell a bit more about that? What was that?
Yes. So her father, when he started this weekly, Lankesh Patrika in 1980, the weekly was run without advertising support. And there was no state patronage either. And that is our dream of independent media. If you're not dependent on anyone for support, you can be free in how you write.
Absolutely.
And that continued until the very last issue.
And she did take government sponsorship for only the Dipotsavyang.
No, she was planning to do that
Okay.
October, but then that was not
right, that did not take place, yeah.
I wanted to talk about some of the questions which she raises in one of her essays. So this is Gauri Lankesh asking, how do we put an end to frauds perpetrated jointly by corrupt governments and exploitative companies? How do we expose such anti-national activities? Can we stop this business of rendering people bankrupt on their own land while offering a red carpet welcome to such companies? Questions like these should have no place in a real democracy, but they are important in a country like ours with its hypocritical democracy.
Yes.
So is this something which she thought could ever change? What was her roadmap for the future?
She believed that things could be reversed.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. And that was the point of her activist struggle, that she was trying to do little reversals, if not major reversals. And she did succeed in mobilizing a very successful movement to stop the takeover of the Baba Budangiri shrine in Chikmagalur in 2003. That was a big point of communal mobilization in the state. And this is a syncretic shrine where both Hindus and Muslims offered worship. And then you had the activists of the Hindu right claiming that it was only a Hindu shrine. And she mobilized a large group of people to congregate there and prevent that from happening, and basically got the police to respect the court's orders that within 2 kilometers of the shrine, you could not have yogas and yagnas and things like that.
Right, yeah. Connected to that, another question is about the kind of challenges she faced. I know she believed in democracy, she believed in elections, she wanted to bring Naxals into the mainstream. What kind of challenges did she face in her attempts to bring Naxals into the mainstream?
Yeah, because it was misunderstood and mischaracterized,
Yes.
more than misunderstood
Yes.
by her opponents. So if you can elaborate on that, yeah.
Yes. See, in early 2000, we have a sanctuary from where tribals were being evicted. And that was a time when a few Naxals moved into the forest and said the eviction of tribals should stop. And Gauri believed that that was important to support. So she didn't support the Naxals' endorsement of violence or their boycott of elections, but she felt that the cause they were embracing needed a hearing. And she did that for a few months. And soon after, the police squashed the Naxal presence, and it effectively became a non-presence. And the few remaining members, she helped them come into the mainstream 2 years ago, about 10 of them in 2 different phases. She was part of a citizens' peace committee with a former Gandhian and a former right-winger, actually. And they negotiated with the state to let them come in without having to submit themselves to humiliating requirements. I mean, if we have a Naxal Rehabilitation Act, we've had it for many years now, which essentially says, if you surrender, we'll give you a stipend, we'll make sure you get a job. but you also have to give out information about your friends back in the forest who may not have surrendered. There are these very, very difficult conditions, and I think some of those conditions he was able to manage to be set aside.
Okay. She was an exceptional woman. How did she, the fact that she is a woman, did it ever change her or alter her presentation of the way she perceived truth? Did it change her perception?
Thank you. It's a great question. You know, as I was putting this book together, what struck me was the number of times she freely says, you know, it makes my eyes moist. This brings tears to my eyes, in ways that are, you know, emotionally serious but not sentimental. And this is, you know, when you write about politics, you assume a hard male persona, even if you're a woman. And Gauri did not do that. And it was actually a very, very special thing about her writing. Okay. She embraced her own emotional world while being politically very serious.
Okay.
And building on that idea of emotions, I mean, what struck me after she died and when I saw after she was murdered, let's see what happened, yeah? After she was murdered, and I was reading tributes to her by people who were touched, whose lives she touched very deeply, a sense of humanity comes through. Now, I'm talking about what Kanhaiya Kumar said, Jignesh Mevani said, you know, so-called, the youth leaders of today, the reasons for hope. She had a very special bond, special relationship with them. Yes. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Salil, thank you. You know, this is another thing that she was doing. You know, she was freely in her paper declaring kin relations with people she admired, younger people, especially like Kanhaiya and Jignesh in recent times. But even if you see her writing 15 years ago, she's saying, my adopted brother, my sister Revati. And it was a very interesting way of declaring a certain kind of familial relation with people on the basis of your own conviction that they're good people doing good things. So there's a celebration of kin for this sort of a larger, building of a larger good politics.
To what extent would you characterize, you talked about her commitment to democracy, of course, and at the same time, the kind of socialism she asked for, India doesn't seem to have much time for it now. It has no interest in it. I mean, it wants to move on, grow 6% a year. You know, if you want to make an omelette, you have to break some eggs. That seems to be the prevailing thinking, and she's one of the obstacles. And therefore an anti-national. Yes. How did she feel the profound change, and particularly because Karnataka itself is going through so many changes politically, about the very virulent form of nationalism. I mean, it was kind of insults that were heaped on Ananthamurthy, for example. Yes. All of that is part of that pattern. So how did that play out?
No, you just watch with horror as this culture is evolving around you, and you try to see what you can do to keep it, from becoming bigger than it already is. As far as the economy goes, I don't know. I think she absolutely rested on the Constitution to give her guidance about how best to proceed in this. So when she's arguing against companies, it's not against companies itself, but the fact that they're violating all the rules that they said they would abide by.
Perhaps it's time to take some questions, please.
I think we should, we've got about 10 minutes. So the lady there and then the gentleman here, shall we take two at a time, maybe, and let's start with these two, and then we'll take more. The lady here, can you stand up, please? So that they can come with the mic to you. And then the gentleman here. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Gauri Lankesh was killed for her work. Now, in recent years, there's been a tragically successful culture of crushing down the truth by people yielding power. Is there a safe way forward as a writer, to tread this thing, or is there even a safe way? Is there anything you would suggest?
More questions?
Let's have the second question as well. We will come to you, of course,
I strongly condemn the murder of Gauri Lankesh, and guilty must be punished, but not yet single one arrested regarding Gauri Lankesh murder. One thing, another, I also strongly condemn all the political murders, just like political motivated murders in Kerala, 30 plus workers of RSS,
your
BJP.
question? Yeah.
Just a minute.
Yeah.
30 plus RSS and BJP workers are killed only in Kerala last 1 or 2 years. Master Sadanand, unke pav kaat diye gaye, brutally killed both the legs. But no outrage will becomes from whole the media, including why selective outrage regarding Gauri Lankesh only? Why you also not condemn all the political motivated killings?
Okay, thank you. Do you want to handle the first one about authors?
There's one more question. Yeah.
It's
difficult. I wish I could say, please continue to write freely, because I can't offer any guarantees. We're in a strange predicament where we want to live by liberal values, and you don't have a political establishment that guarantees you the conditions for living those liberal values. So the task is to go about building a civil society, and how that will, it doesn't exist, as you know. I mean, we talk about it, but where is civil society? 95% of India works outside of contracts, just to name one example, but there are many ways. So, yeah, I think an individual has to discover for himself or herself how to proceed in this milieu.
I think related is the fact that it's the state's responsibility to ensure that the people can speak freely.
Yes.
And it's the state that has to make sure that all of us are free to speak what we wish to speak about. On your question, very quick thought on my part, I don't think the outrage is selective. I mean, if you really go back to the kind of remarks that are made by people about bans, on censorship, they do speak out every time. Absolutely. The difference here is this, that the people you're talking about, and I'm not saying that political workers should have less degree of protection than writers. I'm not at all suggesting that. But the focus right now is about writers, and about writers, wherever there have been cases, people have indeed spoken out. Yes. And we really have 7 minutes and others have to talk, please. Sorry about it. We have a session on free speech right after this. Please do come there. The lady in the pink there, I mean, B, and there's a gentleman at the back with his hand up. Yeah. Yeah.
Mike, I just wanted to highlight that the murder of Gauri Lankesh gives cause for reflection in many areas, but one in particular is that women are disproportionately targeted on social media. And I'd like the panel to respond to that and what we can learn from that, because that's something that, how can the state control that? How can the state intervene?
Trolling on the media.
Yeah,
I'd like to,
please.
Sorry.
Good.
I was just thinking about what's happening about the Padmavati movie in Rajasthan right now, which was released yesterday, and the kind of comments Karni Sena has made. That actually symbolizes how women are targeted and also utilized for a political kind of positioning, which is like an objectification which goes a little further than just the representation of women in a certain way, but actually, you know, sort of protecting their honor, you know, the interpretation of honor. So similarly in this case, I think also Chandan would explain further, but I think there was this idea of that weakness of a person, especially based on gender, being reinforced, I think, by the violence. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's a question at the back, which may be the last. So if you keep it short, I can take one more question.
We have 6 minutes.
Yes.
No, 2 minutes. So I can go that way. Please, yeah.
Yes, you mentioned the role of the state in trying to protect writers who are controversial or against authority and so on. But it is also the culture of tolerance,
yes,
of free speech within the larger society, which also has to be transformed in a liberal way. So it's not only the state. And secondly, to Salil, since you have a very global international experience of writers who are being targeted or have been killed or under protection, how do people, societies, states in these other various countries, what steps do they take to protect writers like Lankesh in different parts of the world? Thank you.
So, I mean, very quickly on the second part of the question, I think there's an enormous solidarity, and it's not restricted to Gauri Lankesh's case. Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese writer, Ashraf Fayyad in Saudi Arabia, many such cases, whenever they happen, writers around the world do speak out. There's also an Indian Writers Forum in India, which has been doing fantastic work in speaking out when these things are under threat. But you're absolutely right that there's need for much greater tolerance, much greater acceptance of differing views, because that's what Amartya Sen said India is really about. We are a bunch of argumentative people. Okay, one last, but very quick, please, because we yeah, please stand up, yeah. Because I'm supposed to be there chairing another panel, so I'm keeping them waiting, so yeah.
First of all, I want to thank Chandan, like, to bring the Gauri's work to us. You know, I'm very thankful to you, and I'm sure everybody of you will be. I want to say that in this book, Gauri has mentioned in an interview that because like that English is not the language which she initially wrote in English, but she did not want to write continue, because her father said that it's the language of the very elite Indian, yes, not the true Indians. Yes. And is it the reason why she got killed, because she was doing work in the local language, and before that 3 rationalists were killed because they were locally very working actively with the people. So is it the reason? Like, I want to know about that. Yeah, English journalists are very much protected. The Delhi-centric media is more protected. I just want to know.
Yes. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right that if you're working in English, you probably have better security. They would not make an absolute argument one way or another. But she was not only working in Kannada, which the audience who have read the book, she was mostly an English journalist who could barely write in Kannada. And she begins to write in it after becoming the editor of this weekly. It's a struggle to learn to write in it, and it's an important episode actually for many of us who grew up in cities with very little talent for writing in Indian languages. And she worked hard at getting it back. But she was not only writing in Kannada, but she was massively involved in things around her, in various activist movements, which made her an important public figure. And I think that was also part of the reason why she may have killed. A quick response to the question, the reason I guess we need to build a civil society is, yes, the state should offer security for sure, but then there is the absolute need for people to have a sense of what is unacceptable and what must absolutely be defended. And that sense about which we were fairly confident for many, many years is now coming undone. So when she's murdered, there are groups that are celebrating, and no one is chastising them. Yes. And the political establishment is fairly silent on the whole episode. So it's unclear. The signals are very, very unclear, and it is not at all conducive to the evolution of a political culture that we all want to have in our midst, where people can dissent, but that does not offer any grounds or for justification for being killed.
Yeah, because one thing that was clear was that we don't know who murdered her, but we know who was celebrating when she died. Absolutely. And that's a very sobering note to end this session on. Thank you very much, everybody.